as the pores.
Alright, so before I get into this one, I want to give you a quick heads up about what kind of story this is, because it starts like a lot of cases I cover. Group of friends, a day off, somewhere they probably should not have gone. You have heard that setup before, but this one goes deeper than most. It is not just a scare at a creepy location and then everyone goes home shaken. There are layers to this. And the reason it has stuck with me is not actually the scariest part of it. It is the saddest part. Keep that in mind as we go. Alright, let us get into it. The person who shared this story we are going to call Arjun. Early 20s, grew up in a mid-sized town in South India, and from everything he described, he is a practical, no-nonsense kind of person. Not someone who goes looking for this stuff. He reached out because something happened to him and his friends, and he had been sitting on it for a while and needed to tell it to someone. Here is the background you need. Arjun's family did not have much money, but he was determined to go to college. The nearest one was about 40 kilometers from home. Too far to commute daily, especially when you are counting every rupee. So he found a hostel near campus, moved in, and started building a life there from scratch. The hostel was basic. For people to a room. Ceiling fan that wobbled when it ran too long. Hot water that worked some of the time. Thin walls where you heard everything happening next door. But the rent was low, and for Arjun that was the whole conversation. His 3 roommates became his people. First there was Kiran, also a student at the same college, different department. Kiran was the kind of guy who could find something funny in basically any situation. Not in an annoying way, just naturally easy to be around. Good energy to have in a small room when the days are long and money is tight. Then there were Dev and Suresh, both a few years older, working as supervisors at a manufacturing plant nearby. Steadier, more experienced, the kind of grounded presence you appreciate when you are still figuring things out. On paper, for pretty different people. But they shared one room and one fan and a single burner they cooked on, and that tends to close the gap fast. When everyone is slightly struggling together, you stop performing and you just become yourself. Arjun and Kiran were both doing weekend work at a local catering company to bring in extra money. Early Saturday mornings, mostly. Setting up events, carrying equipment, serving food. Long hours, not exciting, but it paid. One Friday evening the catering owner called and asked them to come in by 6 the next morning for a breakfast service. Just a few hours, he said. Done and on their way by midday. They went. They worked. By 11 on Saturday morning they were back at the hostel, tired but free. They walked in and found Dev and Suresh already there, both having taken the day off. For guys, sunny afternoon, no obligations. The decision was pretty much made before anyone said anything out loud. Someone mentioned the dam. There was a dam not far from the college, set back into a stretch of dense forest. They had been there a couple of times before. The kind of spot that just does something good for you. Trees everywhere, moving water, almost no phone signal. You show up carrying the weight of the week and after an hour you have mostly set it down. They grabbed both bikes, rode out, parked about 10 minutes walk from the water, and pushed through the trees on foot. The forest out there is the real kind. Not a park, not maintained. Thick canopy, not much light getting through, the kind of undergrowth that makes you aware of how far from a road you are. They had a spot they liked, tucked beside the current. They got there, dropped their things, and the afternoon opened up. They swam, they talked, they sat around without any particular agenda. It was one of those stretches of time that feels unremarkable in the moment and only becomes significant later, when you realize it was the last easy part of the day. Kieran was a strong swimmer. He had grown up near water, he was confident in it, and honestly he had earned that confidence. But he pushed out further than the others, toward where the current runs harder. Arjun called after him. He could see from the bank that the water was behaving differently out there, a tension just below the surface, the kind that experienced swimmers pick up on. Kieran heard him and waved him off. He was fine. He knew what he was doing. 30 seconds later, he was not fine. Kieran started screaming. Not playing around, not reacting to cold water. This was real. He was going under, fighting back to the surface, going under again. Arjun was moving before he had made a conscious decision to move. He went straight in. Underwater, near zero visibility, current pushing sideways. He found Kieran's legs and felt what was wrapped around them. Piece of fabric. Dark, heavy, tangled tight in the root system of a tree that had been submerged for years. Every time Kieran struggled, it got tighter. Arjun grabbed it and pulled. It held. He repositioned and pulled again. His lungs were past comfortable. And then it let go. All at once, like a decision had been made somewhere, the fabric released and drifted off into the current. Gone. Kieran got himself to the bank and collapsed in the shallows, coughing. He was pale and shaking. When he could finally get words out, he said the same thing twice. There was a woman down there. She was pulling me down. I saw her face. Arjun sat beside him and told him it was the panic. That when your brain is running on no oxygen and pure adrenaline, it manufactures things. Fills in the gaps with images you can make sense of. He believed that. It was the explanation that fit. He helped Kieran up and they started gathering their things to head back. Then Arjun noticed Kieran walking the wrong way. Not toward the bikes. Not back down the path they had come in on. Into the trees in the opposite direction, at a slow and even pace, like he was following directions no one else could hear. The other three exchanged a look, and then they saw her. A young woman moving through the trees just ahead of Kieran. She looked about 20 or 21. Pale salwar, everyday clothes, nothing unusual about her at all. She was not in a hurry. She was not looking back. She was just walking, and Kieran was following her with his full attention, like nothing else in the forest existed. The three of them went after him quietly. They talked themselves through it as they moved. She was probably from a village nearby. Maybe she had seen the commotion at the water. There were plenty of normal reasons for a person to be walking through those trees. They kept adding them up. Then she stepped into a thicket of bushes and was gone. Not around them, not through a gap. She was there and then she was not. The pale fabric of her outfit was visible between the branches 1 second, and the next second it was just leaves. Kieran stopped at the edge of that spot, arms at his sides, head tilted slightly, staring. Arjun stepped up and put a hand on his shoulder. Kieran blinked and came back slowly, like someone surfacing from somewhere far down. He looked at his right hand. He was holding an ID card. Nobody had seen him pick it up. Nobody had looked away long enough for that to happen. But there it was, old and dirty, the edges worn soft from years of moisture. The laminate had gone yellow, bubbling at the corners. It was a retail employee card. The name on it read Mina. The photo was the face of the woman who had just walked into the bushes and disappeared. They did not say much on the ride home. Over the next few days, Kieran changed. Slowly enough at first that you could find reasons for it. He stopped talking. The jokes dried up completely. He would sit at the edge of his bed and stare at the wall. Not reading, not on his phone. Just sitting there with a blank focus that did not look like thinking. It looked like absence. He started going to sleep before the others, but Arjun kept waking up in the middle of the night to find his bed empty. He would come back around 4 or 5 in the morning without a word. When he came back, small things were off. Shoes on the wrong feet. Jacket inside out. His shirt on backwards once. Nothing alarming by itself, but it kept happening. They told themselves exam pressure. Tough semester. People go quiet sometimes. They gave him space. Then one Saturday night, Kieran walked out and did not come back. They checked everywhere. Walked the hostel floor by floor, went out to the nearby streets and called his name, asked the neighbors. Nothing. By Sunday midday, Arjun was working out how to call Kieran's family. What do you even say? He was trying to find the words when, late Sunday evening, Kieran walked back through the door. He was covered in mud. Not a splash on his clothes, not a stumble in the rain. Completely coated, head to toe, damp through, like he had been lying in it for hours. His eyes were flat and far away. Arjun asked where he had been. Kieran sat on his bed and looked at the wall. That was the whole response. That night at dinner, a black cat showed up in the open doorway. Nobody in that building owned a cat. There was no reason for a cat to be there. But there it was, sitting in the frame and watching the room. Its eyes moved from person to person, then settled on Kieran. Then it walked in, crossed the room, and climbed into his lap like it had a standing invitation. Kieran started feeding it from his hand, pulling off pieces of food and offering them with a gentle, focused attention that was completely unlike how absent he had been all week. He looked more like himself in that moment than he had in days. Arjun said that almost made it worse. He reached over to move the cat off Kieran's lap. It turned, jumped, and dissolved into Kieran's chest. That is the word Arjun uses, and he uses it carefully. Dissolved. One moment the cat was in the air. The next moment there was no cat. Kieran sat very still with his eyes closed. Then he opened them. The person looking back at Arjun was not Kieran. Same face. Wrong everything else. The way he held himself, the expression, the quality of what was looking out from behind his eyes. All wrong. He stood up and grabbed Arjun by the collar, and the strength in it was completely off. Too much, too fast. Not the grip of the person who had been his roommate for months. Dev and Suresh pulled him off and held him against the wall. They called out for help. The workers from the building next door came over. Among them was an older man who had spent most of his working life in temple service before circumstances brought him to construction. Not a large or loud person, but he had a certain quality of attention. He came in, looked at Kieran for a moment and said in a calm voice, "This is not an illness." He cleared the room. He asked everyone except the 4 roommates to step back and give the space some air. Then he worked with what was available. Turmeric, camphor, halved lemons, dried flowers. These are not dramatic materials. They are ordinary things that carry weight in the tradition he had spent his life practicing. He moved around Kieran slowly and deliberately, speaking quietly, too low for the words to carry across the room. Nobody asked questions. There was something about the way he moved that made questions feel out of place. The room felt different while he worked. Arjun says he cannot put it more precisely than that. Something about the air shifted. It became heavier or more focused or both. Everyone standing in that room felt it. The older man took a bundle of dried banana fiber and struck Kieran lightly across the backs of his legs. An old practice, meant to break the connection between a body and what has taken hold of it. Kieran made a sound that Arjun says he will carry with him for the rest of his life. Not a scream, something older than that. And then came a voice that was not his. Lower, rougher, worn down, like someone who had been calling out into silence for years and had almost given up expecting an answer. The voice said, "My name is Vikram. I am 21 years old. I have been dead for 6 years." The older man spoke to it carefully, the way you talk to someone exhausted and frightened rather than something to be confronted. And over the next several minutes, a story came out. Vikram and Meena had been in love. Young, quiet about it because they had to be, and the place they had made their own was that exact stretch of river. That same forest. That same water. It was theirs in a way that no other place was. In 2018, they were there together on what should have been an ordinary afternoon. Meena got pulled under by a current hidden just below the surface. A whirlpool with no warning. Vikram went in after her without stopping to think. Because that is what you do when the person you love is in the water. He went in. Neither of them came back up. Their bodies were found downstream several days later. And then they stayed. Not to cause trouble, Vikram said. Not out of anger. But because no one had come to perform the rites. No one had helped them leave. So they stayed in the only place that had ever felt like theirs, growing more distant from the living world with every year that passed. Vikram had been drawn to Kieran, the voice said, because the near drowning had mirrored what had happened to Vikram. It had opened something between them, and Meena had come as the cat, just to be present, just to be near. What Vikram asked for was not complicated. His photograph, tucked behind Meena's ID card, and the proper rites performed at the water's edge. Help us go. That was the whole request. The older man said he understood. He spoke quietly for a little longer. Then it was done. The next day, 10 people went back to the river. The 4 roommates, the older man, others from the hostel who wanted to be there. Food offerings were brought. The ceremony at the water was simple and sincere and took the time it needed. When it was over, the place felt different. Arjun says he knew before anyone said anything out loud. The quality of the quiet had changed. They went home. Kieran came back over the following days. Not all at once. It was gradual, the kind of return you only recognize in hindsight. His voice came first, then his humor, then the jokes that nobody had been asking him to justify anyway. He started eating properly again. He stopped disappearing in the middle of the night. He started showing up to class. The wrongness that had been sitting in the room with them for weeks just quietly lifted. He remembered nothing. Not the cat, not the voice, not the mud, not the nights he had been somewhere he could not name. He had just lost time and he could not explain it, and after a while he stopped trying to. Arjun says he still is not sure if that is healthy or just how Kieran is built. Maybe it is both. None of them talk about it much anymore. But Arjun thinks about it. He thinks about Vikram standing right there at that riverbank. 21 years old, aware of what that current was going in anyway. Because the person he loved needed him, and there was no version of that moment where he stood on the bank and weighed his options. And he thinks about himself years later at that same bank, watching Kieran go under and moving without thinking. Because what else do you do? He does not say that out loud very often, but he knows those 2 moments rhyme. And some part of him thinks that maybe Vikram knew it too. I have been covering these stories for a while now, And what I have noticed is that the ones that actually stay with you are almost never the ones with the biggest scares. They are the ones where, once you strip away all the strange and unexplainable stuff, something very human is sitting underneath. This is one of those stories. Two people loved each other. They died together in a place that mattered to them. And for 6 years they were just there. Stuck. Not haunting the place out of anger or unfinished business in some dramatic sense. Just unable to leave because nobody had ever come to help them go. That is the part one keep coming back to. Not the cat, not the possession, not the ID card that showed up in a hand that had not reached for it. It is the 6 years. It is the fact that all they needed was for someone to stop and say, "We know you were here. We know what happened. You can go now." We all want that. We all want to be seen. We want someone to acknowledge that we were real, that what we went through mattered, that we are not going to be forgotten the moment passes. That does not go away just because you are no longer alive, apparently. If you have a story you have been sitting on, something you have not been able to explain to yourself or anyone else, reach out. I read everything. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And if you ever find yourself out in the forest, far from where you parked, near water that is moving in a way that does not quite add up, pay attention. Some places hold onto things longer than you would expect.